Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Peter Spezia, and we're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. This week's game on this solo episode is the realm-shattering sequel to the adventures of Kratos and Atreus throughout Norse mythology, once again stylized in a single cinematic shot, 2022's God of War Ragnarök. Although I'm pretty sure someone out there is going to be like, you know what, it's actually pronounced closer to Ragnarök, but that would be a bit pedantic, and it's not as commercially viable and marketable to Sony Interactive Entertainment. That's right, it's a solo episode today on our last episode before the end of the year. Next week is our Best of 2023 episode, where Joe and I will go over our combined list of the best game soundtracks of the year. And it's surprising that we're here this close to the end of the year. More to the point that I just wanted to make it easy for Joe and be like, hey, if you're going to put any thought toward the podcast, maybe we should have a little more elbow grease on that final episode of the year. But we're really close. We're actually a couple days away from recording it, and that final top 10 is just about hammered out. So we get there nonetheless. But until then, let's talk about 2022's one of the big soundtracks of that year, for last year. And been looking forward to talking about this one for a while. It was my favorite game soundtrack of last year. My favorite game of last year, all told. And it's about time, fitting right before Best of 2023. Let's go over one of the best of 2022. But before then, what have I been playing? I beat Sea of Stars. Did I get the true ending? No. That is a lot to do to get that true ending. I think I only ended up with about 24 of the 60 rainbow conches, and I did a couple of the other big tasks. I guess there's like 7 notable tasks to do. It's a big checklist to get the true ending of the game. I did get some of those checked off, though. It helped for, good skills or good equipment to get for the final battle. But, yeah, it seems like one of those where, maybe some point I might sit down and try to go be thorough to try to get the true ending. But this is not that time, but I'm really glad to check that one off. Love the work Sabotage does, and it's really, really good to finally get that one off the backlog for the year for 2023. But let's get to talking about God of War Ragnarök. God of War Ragnarök. So, we've talked about God of War before on the show. Our very first episode, way back at the end of January in 2019, was talking about 2018's God of War. And so, interesting how it comes full circle. Episode 256 later here. For episode 100, though, we also talked about the original God of War from 2005. And yet, God of War Ragnarök released November 9th, 2022 for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. It was developed by Santa Monica Studio and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. It is a third-person action-adventure game. It kind of seems to be first-party Sony staple, their bread and butter nowadays. And it features an over-the-shoulder, player-controlled camera, and the game is presented with no camera cuts or loading screens. Though, obviously, you can press a start button and go into a menu and navigate all that, but when you come back, the whole experience is seamless. But Ragnarök, as a sequel, builds off of the combat, environment puzzle, and RPG elements from the previous game, with all of the 9 Norse realms being explorable in isolated open spaces. So it's not really fair to call this an open world game, because it's not that, but you can load these 9 different environments, and there are these pretty expansive environments that you get to explore. It's just not, they're all connected, and you go from one to the next in a big open world. Not necessarily. When it comes to the plot of God of War Ragnarök, It's been a long Fimbulwinter, the period of bitter cold before the prophesied Ragnarok, the twilight of Asgard, and the gods. Kratos and his son Atreus return home from a hunt, only to be ambushed by a vengeful Freya, still unforgiving of her son Baldur's death at Kratos' hands. Just as Atreus dreamt 3 years ago, after he learned about his true identity, Thor arrives with his father, Odin, who proposes leaving the Norse gods alone if Atreus abandons his secret search for Tyr. Kratos did not know that Atreus has been searching for the thought-dead Norse god of war to help them in the coming Ragnarok, especially when Kratos just wants to be left alone, while Atreus is struggling with his destiny and identity. It certainly doesn't help that one night, Atreus is magically transported to Jotunheim, or the realm of the future-seeing giants, where he meets a girl his age named Angrboda, who shows him a mural foretelling Kratos' death in Ragnarok, and Atreus serving Odin. So Kratos doesn't want Atreus to distance himself with the boy's secrecy, and Atreus doesn't want Kratos to die at the end of Ragnarok, which is coming soon. The big questions: can father and son escape their fate and make amends with those around them? And what does Odin really want most of all? Here's where I'd ask Joe, what are our experiences with God of War Ragnarok? Well, since he's not here, I'll pick it up. So for me, there are certain games where you try to play through it as quickly as possible in order to avoid spoilers online, and God of War Ragnarok was certainly one of those. I thoroughly enjoyed 2018's at launch, and so was eagerly anticipating a sequel. Every little drip feed of news that came out throughout the pandemic and beyond, super anticipated all of that. When Sony finally put out a state of play story trailer for God of War Ragnarok, that trailer is excellent. I think it's when we hear Odin for the first time and kind of get a sense of all the different players that are at work here in this sequel to a play, essentially, because everyone kind of mentions how the first God of War game it's like a play. The actors come in and out, and yet the camera follows along all the time. And so for that, the sequel just to be bigger and better at, a sacrifice of some things, I thoroughly enjoyed God of War Ragnarok, and its soundtrack is just bigger and better, and certainly one worth talking about on the show here. Interesting to learn a bit about some of the behind the scenes, behind the development of the game, because development of Ragnarok took 5 years, like the original game did. And Eric Williams, who's someone who had different roles on the different God of War games before, he took the lead on game director for Ragnarok, with previous director Cory Barlog taking a backseat to advise and oversee his original vision for the story. In fact, Kratos' actor Christopher Judge briefly quit after being informed of this change, but Barlog was able to convince Judge that Williams was the right person for the job. The biggest decision for this game was deciding to end this Norse saga in this game, in 2 games, instead of stretching this Norse God of War franchise out to a trilogy. And it was Cory Barlog's choice ultimately, as he didn't want the story stretched out over too long of a time. Eric Williams said that after the decision was made, while pacing had to be adjusted, the story was not scaled back. In fact, Barlog told Williams that the story needed 3 important plot aspects. He said, Ragnarok must happen. There is something that happens to Atreus at the end of the game, and he says that must happen. And also, the end of Act 2 gut punch must happen. We'll keep things generally vague for those that have not played the game in about its first year or so. While the game was first revealed at the end of September 2020's PlayStation Showcase with a title splash noting a 2021 release window, the game had to be delayed due to Christopher Judge recovering from a surgery, as well as, well, you guessed it, the COVID-19 pandemic. And this delay meant that they had to deal with Sonny Suljic's voice, and he's the actor for Atreus. Sonny's voice was changing through puberty, so audio adjustments were made to make the performances sound like they took place over a shorter period of time. We saw a first narrative and gameplay trailer, and it was shown just before E3 2021, which confirmed the delay, and then the final release date was confirmed with another trailer in 2022. And this game, I mentioned, Odin's voice for the first time. Incredible casting in this game, just remarkable. Not only do you have Richard Schiff as Odin, Ryan Hurst as Thor, Scott Porter as Heimdall, Brett Dalton as Freyr, Emily Rose as Sif. The list goes on and on and on. Yeah, you want Toby from The West Wing being Odin? Amazing. Ward from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as Freyr. Elena Fisher from Uncharted as Sif. It just goes on and on. But then there is some more fun casting choices with Leia DeLeon Hayes as Angrboda. You may or may not know her as the voice of Doc McStuffins. There's Sungwon Cho, the internet's pro ZD, as Ratatoskr. Milana Vaintrub as Lunda. And you're like, who is that? For those in the States, that is AT&T's Lily as Lunda. And then the composer, Bear McCreary, has an appearance of a dwarf character named Rabe, who is a musician. So just great casting all around. The game reviewed very well, with a Metacritic average of 94. Critics praised the game's storytelling, characters, visuals, level design, music, and overall improvements to the gameplay over its predecessor. There's just more verticality there. The biggest critiques were its narrative pacing. There are certain parts that either felt too long or just had to get cut and rushed along to make all of the rest of the plot fit into one game. Some people found the overall gameplay to be too similar to 2018's God of War despite the improvements. And a fair critique as well was the over-eagerness with puzzle-solving assistance. You may be working around a puzzle a little bit, and sooner than you would have liked, Atreus is like, what if we do this? The solution. And that kind of rubbed some people the wrong way. But God of War Ragnarök became the fastest-selling first-party game in PlayStation history, selling 5.1 million units in its first week. And it has sold 15 million units as of November 2023. I'm sure that helps after it got bundled in with PlayStation 5, but still, really, really good sales numbers. And it was nominated for 11 awards at the Game Awards, including Game of the Year. It won 6, including Best Narrative, Best Performance, and Best Score and Music. It was nominated 15 times at the BAFTAs, which is the most nominations for any game in the history of the ceremony. It won 6, including Performer in a Leading and Supporting Role. The Supporting Role category had 4 of its 6 nominees from Ragnarök, and Leia DeLeon Hayes for Angrboda won. And it also won for Best Music. It was then also nominated 12 times at the DICE Awards, winning 7, including Character, Story, and Music. So it swept music in the 3 big Game Awards ceremonies. But what's the legacy of God of War Ragnarök? Well, just recently, at the 2023 Game Awards on December 7th, a free DLC pack called God of War Ragnarök Valhalla was announced and released on December 12th, which is really funny to me because there's Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which got a Dawn of Ragnarök expansion. Now you have God of War Ragnarök getting a Valhalla expansion. It all works within the Norse mythology. But it serves as an epilogue to Ragnarök, and Valhalla follows Kratos and Mimir in a series of roguelite-based challenges, because everything is roguelite, and it all takes place in Valhalla. Apparently it calls back even to the motivations of Kratos' time in Greece, and it's getting some really good buzz, surprisingly. Is it going to be enough to make me pick up the game and install it again? Not sure, but I'm really happy that this DLC comes out of nowhere and it's hitting pretty well. As far as a future God of War game goes, though, there have always been little hints and references that other mythologies exist in the universe. There is the River Kingdom, which is all about the Egyptian mythology, and you've seen like Celtic symbols and Japanese-inspired symbols. So, like, possibilities abound. I feel like if the rumors and, kind of scuttlebutt, if you will, if there's going to be another mythology for a future God of War game, especially, after how Valhalla, the DLC, ends, Egyptian might be the one to push a little more of the chips on. But that's for Sony Santa Monica to decide what to do. When it comes to the composer for God of War Ragnarök, we've talked about Bear McCreary before, all the way back on that first episode of Original Soundchat. So who to talk about for this one? Well, there is one more composer for music in this game, specifically with the credits theme. And so let's talk about Andrew John Hozier-Byrne. And he was born on March 17th, 1990, in Bray, County Wicklow, Ireland. He is an Irish musician, singer, and songwriter known professionally as Hozier. His music primarily draws from folk, soul, and blues. And as a child, Hozier self-identified as a class clown and an unfocused student, calling school a monotonous nightmare. But he began writing songs at the age of 15, and he taught himself guitar, and he sang in his school choir. He became involved with the Trinity Orchestra while studying music education at Trinity College, Dublin. And he was a member of and toured with the choral ensemble Anuna from 2007 to 2012. And we've talked about Anuna before with their work in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. But then Hozier wrote the song Take Me to Church in 2013, in between playing open mic nights in Dublin. The rough demo resulted in him signing with the indie label Rubyworks Records, and after pulling together a music video on a shoestring budget, that was shared by English actor Stephen Fry, which helped it reach the front page of Reddit, and it subsequently became a viral video. It would eventually be nominated at the Grammys for Song of the Year. Musically, Hozier has listed Aretha Franklin, Johnny Cash, Woody Guthrie, Van Morrison, Ella Fitzgerald, St. Vincent, Feist, Little Green Cars, Paul Simon, Willie Dixon, and Lisa Hannigan as musical and vocal influences. And his lyrics often contain vivid literary references and draw imagery from nature and religion. They tend to focus on the themes of romantic relationships, love, and socially conscious politics. And you can follow him on Twitter at Hozier. That's Hozier. Hozier has 3 studio albums and 7 EPs. Those studio albums are 2014's Hozier. There's Wasteland Baby from 2019 and Unreal Earth from 2023. And God of War Ragnarök has been his only contribution to games. Because the main score and soundtrack in God of War Ragnarök is once again composed by Bear McCreary, except for one track where Hozier worked with him. And once again, Eivor Pálsdóttir returns for vocals on some tracks. Can't miss her voice, that's for sure, and we'll hear her on one of the 5 critical tracks for God of War Ragnarök. Let's start with the aptly titled first track, the main theme. It is, of course, called God of War Ragnarök. Well established early on in the discussion on 2018's God of War that Bear McCreary wrote this new Kratos theme as a simple 3-note progression. Ba, ba, ba. Just like a rising note pattern. And of course, that leitmotif carries throughout much of the game, especially when you're playing as Kratos. And so, God of War Ragnarök as a track doesn't vary too much melodically from its original God of War theme. But because it is Ragnarök and it's the big climax and it's the twilight of the gods, especially where this clip comes at the end of the track, the bombast of the scale of the orchestra going on is immense, and it just sounds like the end of things. And so, of course, this one had to be here. It reiterates on a classic theme for the recent version of the franchise, but just makes it bigger and better. Contrarily, number 2 on the Critical 5 does a bit of an inversion. And when you have possibly another playable character, let's say, they need a theme as well. So number 2 on the Critical 5 for God of War Ragnarök is A Sun's Path. What I would say is probably the musical standout of the game is a theme for Atreus. And as Atreus starts to grow into his own, what his identity is, and what his destiny is, and you start to play sections of the game as Atreus, a nice breath of air and just a different pacing where combat can rely a bit more on his bow and arrow and different kinds of arrows. It's really nice there. But Atreus needs a theme as well. And as a counterpoint to his father, who has the rising action of dun dun dun, Atreus' youthful energy comes off as an inversion that works down in a 3-note pattern of da 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 da. It's just a neat blending there, and especially the drums that kick in as he has this kind of big character moment in Ironwood, running about, shall we say, through the woods. A great moment for this music to kick in and really solidify this Atreus theme. It definitely had to be here. It's one that got pushed a lot in promotions and marketing. Just a really, really strong piece. And for Atreus finally getting a theme because he finally has some agency of his own, it's a really nice touch by Bear McCreary. But what about Ironwood as you start to explore the different realms in the Norse mythology to places that you really didn't have much exploration freedom in before? Let's talk about number 3 on the Critical 5. This is Giantess of Ironwood. Just a beautiful piece, and one that captures your attention really early on in the story. Ironwood is kind of like, in a way, like the make or break section of the game. Like, you're gonna care about Atreus one way or the other through this admittedly a bit long Ironwood section. Probably an easy point to point out, like, oh, maybe the pacing could have been a little better. But honestly, it's captivating to go to Jotunheim, a place where you go to at the end of 2018's God of War, and oh, all the giants are dead. Are they, though? Because for Atreus to meet Angrboda is, 1, fitting in the mythology, but 2, just a great character and a kind of counterpoint for his character, and to represent the freedom and what's possible for him outside of his father's influence. Just a captivating place, but also a character for Atreus to play off of. And Lea DeLeon Hayes just does an amazing job playing her, but this music is spellbinding, with this plucked instrument, the stringed instrument that's kind of going through, the choir that comes in to add a little bit of mysticism for these future seeing giants. And man, it sets the stage for what's possible out there for Atreus and adventure, and some of the danger that can go along with it too. But for now, to be aware of what else is out there, Jotunheim is seemingly untouched by the danger of the Fimbulwinter and the coming Ragnarok. And so it's just an amazing piece on Bear McCreary's score. We get to number 4, though, on the Critical 5, and we get to a realm that is more central to the events that go on in many ways, but it realizes a different texture and a different feel for the music. So this one here is called Svartalfheim. We explored Alfheim in the original God of War, but we never got to Svartalfheim, which is the realm of dwarves. You hear Eivor's voice here, and that echoes the Fae theme, Fae being Kratos' wife and Atreus' mother, and it feels like her presence is still felt throughout this game, and wow, it sure is, but nice to hear it here as well. And Svartalfheim is also where you get a new way to interact in combat. We'll leave it at that. It's a cool moment for sure, because you start off with the axe, and you also start off with the Blades of Chaos. But what if you had another method of combat? And so Svartalfheim is just a great piece overall. It's like one of the first big new areas that you get to explore outside of Midgard, and it just makes a great initial impression. Really interesting how McCreary comes up with the themes to represent the different areas of the Norse mythology. And for Svartalfheim, yeah, the chanting and have it represent, like, you can almost hear like the anvils and hammer strikes working in the background with the craftsmanship of the dwarves. And it's just a really, really cool piece. But yeah, Eivor's voice coming through is just the perfect touch. But we'll wrap up the Critical 5 with Hozier's contribution to the game. And it's a theme that plays during the credits. This is Blood Upon the Snow. Especially after you get the secret ending of God of War Ragnarok, which we'll get to a little bit and still keep it spoiler free. You get the full roll of credits, and it is this theme that is composed by Bear McCreary and Hozier. Blood Upon the Snow, Hozier's first contribution to a video game soundtrack, is a fan of the franchise, so that was a neat connection for him. Says they were able to find a balance so that the song was, quote, not too elegiac, not too much of an elegy, not too sweet, not too lullaby-esque, not too outrageously doom and gloom, and not too absolutely metal. And what do you get when you have a song like that? Well, you get a song that ends up being performed live at the Game Awards 2022. Just a really strong listen. you get the ba ba ba. So the Kratos theme mixes back in and kind of brings it full circle. But really nice to have Hozier's voice come into all of this. And it's just a great touch. And among many end credits themes out there, just one that you wouldn't expect for God of War Ragnarok, and yet it's so very welcome. For picking out a couple tracks on the cutting room floor, not easy to do, but there were a couple themes that stood out amongst the rest. And so for me, the first one of these is called The Hand of Odin. A neat little play on words for the title, because as far as I can tell, this is Thor's theme and music that plays throughout the piece representing big Thor moments, like where you meet Thor and at the end of the game with Thor. But yet, there is a nefarious twist to it all, and that would be with Odin pulling all the strings. And so this theme that comes, triplet, these triplets that come through, it's so good. And then the big grandiose chords with Thor's theme, but it's those elements that really stand out, especially in the first big confrontation and the encounter that you have with Thor at the beginning, because there is a theme called the Hammer of Thor later in the soundtrack, and I think that's more for the end encounter. But it has a little more sense of freedom to it and not this dark foreboding, almost like a Sith Lord in a way, looking over the encounter. So not only do you have the Hand of Odin, Thor being the might and the executioner for Odin, but also the Hand of Odin playing Puppet Master. Just a neat theme to kind of represent the more nefarious forces at work in this game. But then you talk about real emotional wallop here to round out the cutting room floor. You could talk about something that could have made the Critical 5. This track is called Rabe's Lament. As previously mentioned, Rabe is a musician character in this game, played by Bear McCreary, voice, mocap, and everything. And Rabe plays this hurdy-gurdy, this kind of melody that kind of goes along the undercurrent. At the beginning of the piece, it's the only solo instrument playing, but then you get these deep choral vocals that come in. And for a lament, fitting for a funeral, the theme to play in the secret ending of the game. Like in 2018's God of War, if you kind of follow the dialogue, there's a place you can go in the world where it'll trigger a special ending scene. And boy, this one hits on the emotions for sure. Kind of a bit of a downer place to end the game before you get the blood on the snow credits roll, but still a powerful moment in the game for sure. Just excellent writing. What will I never forget about the game? I'll tell you, that big twist at the end of Act 2 was one that you only start to piece together as the characters do. And even then, it comes out of nowhere and hits. And I remember while playing it, and my fiance was kind of napping on the couch. And once you kind of get through the aftermath of that big twist, that big wallop, she wakes up and we're about to go to bed, and she's just like, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" And I'm just like, something happened. I didn't want to spoil it for her if she was eventually going to play, but I don't know if I'm okay. It's going to take me a little bit to get over this. But that was a big moment. And, interesting to hear how it was, kind of was planned by Cory Barlog, but the way they did it, it's going to be a game, God of War Ragnarok, to go back and see foreshadowing, because I'm sure there is so much. It's a lot like I was just playing Sea of Stars in that way, and my fiance is going back and she's doing a run through of Sea of Stars. But now to watch and see like all the foreshadowing in that game for all the twists that one has, it's always one of the neat things about experiencing games. But for big moments and big boss encounters and just the soundtrack works so well. And for a game and a soundtrack to sweep the big three for the Game Awards, the BAFTAs, and DICE to win each of the music categories there, it certainly says something. I don't know if Final Fantasy 16 kind of starts out that with Game Awards for this year's slate of awards. I don't know if that'll sweep, but God of War Ragnarok, I think, was certainly a fitting one last year. It was number 2 in our best of 2022. And I think a very, very deserving, highly ranked soundtrack of that year. And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smash Your Pieces, is hosted. You can find Smash Your Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts on catchers all around the globe. Apple Podcasts, anywhere. I was going to say Google Podcasts, but that's going away soon. You can even get them on Spotify, where we not only have a feed of podcast episodes, but we have a playlist on Spotify of video game music. If we talked about a track on the show and it's on Spotify, it gets added this huge playlist, hours, days long of video game music that we've covered. And God of War Ragnarok is on Spotify, so these tracks will be added there. Only a couple more, though, because, of course, we had it in Best of 2022, so some of those were already there. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? What did we miss? What should we cover in the future? Give us some suggestions for games to talk about on the future of the show. Speaking of which, next week, it is our Best of 2023 episode. We'll talk about the best game soundtracks of the year. We've just about put our own personal lists together, and then we synthesize it into one top 10 for you, give you some honorable mentions. It's a good time with the best game music of the year. Can't miss. Always a good one. To play us out, let's highlight a fan cover, a fan remix on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever. It was tempting to find a Blood Upon the Snow cover, right? But didn't find one that I especially liked. And so what else stands out musically from this soundtrack? And it's A Sun's Path. I think that was like one of the big standout tracks for sure. And so Alina Gingertail over on YouTube, she did a cover with a lot of the original instruments, but just all kind of playing herself and assembling them all together. It sounds really good, and it's a great take on Atreus' theme with A Sun's Path. Please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening to Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.